Today, our call is about an introduction to nonviolent direct action on April 16th, 2017. So I want to welcome everyone. We had over 70 people RSVP for this conversation. So welcome from folks all over the globe. This was an invitation for all ME activists from around the world. I'm Terri Wilder. I'm going to be your facilitator today. And I am a person who's living with ME. I was diagnosed about 11 months ago. Just to give a little bit of background about myself, I've been an AIDS activist since 1989, been involved with ACT UP and other groups around the United States, and became an ME activist about 11 months ago when I was diagnosed. Because we're going to plan on doing these types of teach-in conversations on a regular basis, I've included my email, which is plwilder@mindspring.com, because I'd love to hear about other activist topics that you'd like for me to help coordinate. Before we get started, just things to mention. I've already asked folks if they could go ahead and mute so that we can avoid any background noise. We are going to be recording this discussion because some people were not able to attend today and reached out to us about it. If you have any questions or discussion points that you want to bring up but aren't comfortable maybe bringing it up yourself verbally when we have time for discussion, you can type them into the chat box if you're online, and I'll read them for the whole group when we get to that part. We're going to hold discussion till the end so that our speaker can kind of get through the foundational information. So the purpose of our webinar today is really because of, across the globe, people with ME are frequently dismissed and ignored. There's also little funding that flows towards ME research, and government and other institutions have really contributed to decades of neglect. This was something that I recognized when I was first diagnosed, and comparing it to kind of what I experienced in the HIV community, that we're really kind of, really struggling here to get the attention that we deserve. So after talking with a lot of activists that I'm friends with, it seemed like it would be a great idea to actually have a web-based discussion on nonviolent direct action as a strategy for social change. So I'm going to introduce Alexis Danzig, who's going to be talking with us today about nonviolent direct action. With her mother, Alexis began attending anti-Vietnam War protests in the 1960s, and as a child, and grew up boycotting grapes and iceberg lettuce in solidarity with the Farm Workers Union, organizing efforts for decent living conditions and fair pay. And when her father died of AIDS in 1988, Alexis joined ACT UP and learned how to create nonviolent disruption to oppose government inaction and the indifference of the scientific and pharmaceutical industries. ACT UP changed the course of the AIDS crisis and has been instrumental in the fight against AIDS worldwide. With a team of AIDS ACT UP trainers, Alexis has participated in training hundreds of people in nonviolent direct action for social change. She currently organizes with ACT UP veterans in Rise and Resist New York City, which is a direct action group. And of course, she offers free trainings like the one we are going to hear today. She also works as a grant writer and a house painter. So please welcome Alexis Danzig.
Hello, everybody. So I wanted to let you know, first of all, that this is a very truncated training. It's cut down from a 5-hour training that I give in New York City and around the States when we're invited by different organizations. So this is really just an introduction and an overview of nonviolent direct action. So as you can see here, whoops, no problem. There's a long tradition of American direct action which covers hundreds of years and many different movements. There have been many things that have been lawful, but which people have been opposed to on moral or ethical grounds or a variety of other grounds. And so this is a very American tradition, and a tradition in which perhaps many of your forebears have also participated. You know, we don't all have Quaker relatives, but there were a lot of Quakers in the anti-slavery movement. We don't all come out of the labor rights movement, but a lot of our families participated in the civil rights movement and the peace movement. And these are all models for how we do direct action today, nonviolent direct action. You can change the slide, Terri. So one person who we think of very fondly when we're talking about direct action is a gentleman called Gene Sharp. And he basically codified direct action during the 1960s, and he's still hard at work. He's in his 80s now. And one of the things that he has put together is 198 methods of direct action. And this is sort of like a list, and it's organized into different types of direct action. And it includes a lot of things that we all know and that we all have used in order to put pressure on elected officials and government or corporations to affect change. And just some of the 198 methods of direct action are boycotts and shutdown actions, like school walkouts. I'm sure you're all familiar with letter writing campaigns or more recently email campaigns. There are speak outs and teach-ins, like this is actually a teach-in. There are public theatrics with sometimes life-size puppets, sometimes just people acting out a little play about what they don't like. There are public disruptions, like walking into a meeting or a fundraiser. And there are also public refusals, where people might refuse to take an award or refuse to meet with someone because they want to make a larger point. And with all of this, the emphasis of direct action is either on small group action or on mass action. In other words, you don't have to be putting together a general strike where you shut down all different kinds of workplaces. You can actually do direct action just with a few people. Okay, Terri. So part of direct action, for me, an essential part is the tactic and the philosophy of nonviolence. And this is an approach to doing direct action where we take responsibility for our own actions, and we also take responsibility for other people who are involved in our group. It is a way of ensuring that everyone can participate, not just people who are able-bodied or young or strong or fit. And it is effective for producing long-term change for democracy, even under harsh conditions. And I'd recommend that everybody should take a look at Erica Chenoweth's TED Talk. I can send you a link to this afterwards if you haven't already gotten it. But she's a political scientist who has studied the efficacy of nonviolent direct action. And she sort of has proven what I've known, in my gut. She's proven with data that nonviolent direct action really makes for lasting change, can include a lot of people, and really works to create democratic conditions. Thanks, Terri. So civil disobedience is a tool for social change. it is not necessarily your very first form of direct action. Maybe you want to try phoning people, maybe you want to petition them, maybe you want to get together with a group to pay a visit to a legislator or to a pharmaceutical company. But if you've tried other forms of direct action and you haven't gotten any success, then you might want to try civil disobedience. And I'll try to define civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is the breaking of bad laws or using legal regulations in order to shut down business as usual. And this creates a kind of leverage where the activists who are doing civil disobedience are putting pressure on the outside, while other people, or some people from the same group, are sitting down with the legislators, continuing to talk to them. So it's a nice form of pressure where you are raising awareness for your cause, you're teaching people about why it's important, and you're also making the lives of people who are making your lives hard, you're making their lives difficult. It's a way to raise awareness and put pressure. So one of the tools that has been used in the past has been literally the breaking of bad laws. During the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Leadership Conference and students in a variety of cities in the South would sit in at lunch counters that were segregated, and they would desegregate them by sitting there. And if you've seen the photographs, or maybe if you were there, you will know that these people were very brave, and they sat at the lunch counters even while people poured ketchup on them, and people poked and harassed them, and people hit them. They did not retaliate. That is part of nonviolence. That is part of how we practice nonviolence. But we don't have a lot of bad laws to break now. What we do have are ways to blockade and make obstructions so that we can shut down business as usual. And those can be soft blockades, like sitting in the street or sitting in front of a building, linking our arms, or they can be hard blockades where we do things like we chain ourselves together, we U-lock ourselves to a fence, or we put our hands into pipes so that we can't be easily removed. And all of those tactics are a delaying tactic. Soft blockades can also be used with what we call a wave system, where one wave of people comes in and sits down and blocks something, and as soon as that group is arrested and removed, which takes a certain amount of time, another group can come in and they can sit down in the same or a similar place. So that way we also delay and add to the pressure that we're bringing on a particular issue. Okay, Terri. So when we organize to do civil disobedience, we need to be disciplined and we need to be able to practice solidarity. Again, what I'm offering you today is a much truncated version of a 5-hour training where we actually go through many of the different components of discipline and solidarity, and we actually have time to practice that. But we use typically consensus-based decision-making for action planning. What this means is that we sit in a circle, very old-fashioned, and we make sure that we can see everyone's face, and everyone has not only the ability, but also the responsibility to join in and talk about what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with for making a good action. And this is it's very important to hear from everyone, because we believe that with everyone's voices, the action is stronger, the action is better. the action means that everybody can participate. There are ways of taking a vote in consensus-based decision making, but it's not 51 versus 49. It's not a numerical vote. We want to come to consensus or come to at least a 2/3 consensus so that people can be lukewarm about an action, and then we need to keep talking about what would make it better, what would make it good for everybody, what would make it feasible for everyone to feel great about participating. And usually what happens is we create an action which isn't my action, and it may not be your action. It may not be our favorite action, but it's an action that everybody can participate in, and that's what makes it strong. In a nonviolent action, everyone signs on for an agreed upon minimal level of nonviolence. What that means is things like we will not create violence towards anybody, towards the police, towards bystanders. We will not bring weapons to an action. We will not bring recreational drugs to an action. It also means that we will not use bad language. We may be ferocious, we may be chanting, we may be angry, but we're not going to direct our anger towards any one person. Everyone agrees to the things that will be group or individual actions. For example, we might decide as a group that if we're not arrested after a certain number of hours, that we're going to get up and leave together. Or when the cops come to arrest us, we may decide to sit there and allow ourselves to be arrested, to risk arrest. But there are certain individual actions that we can take within that. For example, we can walk when the police ask us to walk, or we can take the individual decision to what we call go limp and be carried off the arrest site. And then once we're in jail, the way that we organize to make sure that everyone is safe and that no one is singled out for harsher treatment is that we use our bodies and our voices to get what we want. And we gum up the process of the arrest process so that we make it much harder for the police to process us until we get what we want, until someone's handcuffs are loosened, until people have access to a toilet if they need to go to the bathroom, so that no one is singled out and we don't know what happened to them. So having that kind of discipline and solidarity while we're in jail is also very helpful for keeping people safe. Okay. When we do an action where we risk arrest by committing civil disobedience, we have a lot of supporters. I was recently in an action in New York City that shut down Trump Tower, and we had 25 people who risked arrest, but we also had 25 people at least who participated in the action in many other ways. One way that people participated in the action was by providing support for the action, and that is different from legal support. Support for the action means that these are the people who have our names and addresses and our emergency contact information in case anything goes wrong during the action, in case we're held longer than expected. In addition, we also have legal support, and legal support means that we have lawyers who can get into the jail to make sure that things are going all right. And these are people who represent us when we are arraigned and come before a judge. Okay. So there are lots of ways to produce successful action, but it is definitely important that you are trained and therefore thoughtful about how you want to enter doing this work, and that you come to the meetings. Meetings are usually organized in what we call affinity groups. They're people who are willing to risk arrest or willing to help those who are risking arrest. I'm part of a much larger group called Rise and Resist, which is modeled on ACT UP as a format. And ACT UP was useful as a place to get information about new drugs, new methods of treatment, but it was also a place where we planned actions in order to put pressure on pharmaceutical companies and government officials. But within that large meeting, we would rarely discuss actions where we would risk arrest. We would meet separately in what we called affinity groups, what we still call affinity groups, to plan actions. And the reason why we use affinity group structures is because we trust each other. We know the people who are in the affinity group. We build trust over time by going to a lot of meetings together, by discussing things, by coming to a consensus-based decision about what we all want to do. And it also means that different affinity groups can do different kinds of actions within a much larger action. So an affinity group like I participated in just a couple of days ago, we had one group that was lowering banners within Trump Tower. We had another affinity group that was blocking the elevators at Trump Tower. And we had a third group that was providing a tour, a docent-led tour, where they were explaining why Trump's recent policies against immigration and refugees are so racist and xenophobic. So we met many, many, many times, all of us, all the different parts of those affinity groups, to make sure that we were comfortable with the plan. And we also went to the site. We took many day trips, individually and in groups, to Trump Tower, which is a privately operated public space, in order to make sure that we could do the actions that we wanted to do. In other words, we decided where we were going to be and what time of day. We tried to figure out how we would drop the banners, how we would affix them without damaging anything, because part of nonviolence is no property damage. And in order to do that, we also had to come up with very, very clear demands. And although there are many different reasons for targeting Trump, we felt that it was very important at this particular time for us as a group to promote a no ban, no wall, no raids action. So that was what our action was focused on. We had leaflets, our banners had no ban, no wall, no raids on them. We had T-shirts with the same thing, and we held up signs that said things that also promoted the same policy review. We had chants. We wrote a clear press release with a lot of help, and we also had photographers and other media people along with us, and also promoting the action so that it got out. And we had international press. It was pretty well covered. Thanks, Terri. So I'll read to you from our CD manual a little bit about what happens once you've been arrested and then taken to arraignment. Arraignment is where you come before a judge. And this is what is likely to happen. What I mostly know about is what happens in New York City. And so it's very important for you to work with a lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer, who knows what happens when people are arrested in your locality, because there are different laws that govern different kinds of behavior. You may be arrested for different things. And then there's also the culture of the police department in your area. An action never ends with your arrest. It continues all through to the disposition of your case. And so we use solidarity in jail. We use the actual process of getting fingerprinted and having our names taken in order to protect one another. And what I mean by that is we've chosen to give a minimum of information to the police. All the police need to be able to ascertain that we are who we say we are is to have an ID that has a picture of us on it, that has our name, our date of birth, and our address. NBA, that's how we like to remember this. We don't need to give any other information. Any other information that the police ask us for is used to profile us, is used to keep track of who we are, and they have plenty of other ways of doing that. So we do not willingly participate in the tracking of ourselves while we also take responsibility for our actions. So by having, let's say, a driver's license or another form of state-issued ID in New York City, we have a New York City ID, which works perfectly well for arrests without giving our resident or citizen status. And that's very important because in this day and age, there are people who have varying levels of residency status, and we do not want them singled out if they want to participate in our actions. So we don't answer questions like, are you an immigrant? Or where were you born? Or how many tattoos do you have? Or who is the leader of your group? Or any of those kind of questions. We only answer the questions name, birth date, and address. And that's enough information for the police to be able to identify that we are who we say we are, and we're not some other person in some other state who's wanted for, a parking ticket. Usually the charges that we're given are violations, which are the moral equivalent of a parking ticket. They're like a summons. And we're given desk appearance tickets for low-level misdemeanors. I was recently arrested. I don't have my desk appearance ticket right with me, but the 3 charges that I was given was obstruction of government procedure. That's because I chose to go limp when I was arrested, and the police carried me out of Trump Tower. But I was also charged with, let's see if I can remember this, trespassing, because I refused to leave when I was asked. And then there was one other charge that everybody also got, which was a violation level offense. In New York City, when we come before the judge, when we are arraigned, we will be there in a group with our lawyer, and it's up to the prosecutor to offer a particular deal for us. Typically, for first-time offenders and often for activists, in New York City, we're offered something which is called an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. And this is kind of like a promise that if I don't do anything naughty in the next 6 months, my arrest will disappear and it will be as if it never happened. Now, the idea is that if you go out and get rearrested within the 6-month period, the prosecution has the opportunity to open up both charges again and charge you in court with both violations or both low-level crimes. But that has actually never happened in New York City. So we often are people who have multiple ACDs open because we feel that this is important work and an important way to pressure the powers that be to notice us, to understand our demands, and make change, make social justice change. Next slide. So here are a bunch of resources that I highly recommend for all of you out in Northern California. Berkeley in the 60s is a wonderful video, which is about the rise of the free speech movement at Berkeley. And then there are a couple of different ACT UP videos which were made back in the 80s. And the first one, Doctors, Liars, and Women, is really important because it shows you the role of women within the ACT UP movement. Women were also on the other side of the camera, and women were very important in making sure that there was a video record of the AIDS crisis and of the AIDS activist reaction and response to the AIDS crisis. United in Anger is really great for a lot of organizing tips. How to Survive a Plague is more recent revisiting of the AIDS movement and of the AIDS crisis, as is Sex in an Epidemic, which is by Jean Carlin Musto. And last, I want to put in a plug again for Erica Chenoweth's TEDx talk on civil resistance. It's really worth watching. It's not how to create a civil disobedience action, but it's a backgrounder on why civil resistance, nonviolent civil resistance, works. And now I'm going to open it up for everybody if you'd like to ask me any questions.
Actually, we have a couple more slides.
Cool. So Direct Action, Protest and the Reinvention of American Radicalism is by a longtime activist, L.A. Kaufman. It was just published, and it's a very interesting exploration of the last 30 years of direct action, what's worked, what hasn't worked. There's also a book which is very wonky by Erica Chenoweth. It's not my first choice, but if you wanted to have a little bit of background reading on the data that Erica Chenoweth has collected and the different places in which civil resistance has worked, it's a fascinating read. And then there's also a brand new book, How to Survive a Plague, which is a very day-by-day chronicling by David France of how ACT UP functioned. It's not the only source of information on how ACT UP worked, but it's a good one. Gene Sharp's 198 Methods of Nonviolent Action can be Googled, as can all of the others. Erica Chenoweth's It May Only Take 3.5% of the Population to Topple a Dictator, very worth reading. Tim Snyder's 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, and if you can get your hands on anything by Masha Gessen, she is well worth reading as well.
Great, thank you, Alexis.
You're very
so now
welcome.
I'm going to open it up for discussion. I'm just going to switch over the slide so we can see each other.
Hello.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
So,
Can I speak?
hi, everyone. So we're going to open it up for discussion. We have about 24 people, so it may get a little challenging. I just kind of bear with all of us as people want to have questions with Alexis, or maybe want to just bring up an area to talk about.
Sure, and I'm also available by email. I'm happy to get an email from you if you want to write me a question if we don't get around to answering it. So let me give you my email address if you don't mind. It's pretty simple. It's alexisdanzig@gmail.com, and I'll spell that out for you. It's ALEXIS like Sam, Danzig, DAN like Nancy, Z like zebra, IG like George, @gmail.com. And I'd be happy to take your questions.
And for folks who are online, I just put it in the chat box.
Thank you.
Great. Great.
Any questions
so,
on what you did yesterday? Actually, it was a couple of days ago.
So I guess it would be helpful to kind of hear where folks are from. If I know we have some folks from the United States.
I have a question, although I think Bobby actually was.
Hi, and if you could say your name. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
This is
Can
Bobby.
you introduce yourself?
This is Bobby Alcibel from SF, California.
Hi, Rivka.
That's my grandson. Okay. I'm reading Direct Action, Kaufman's book, and I'm up to page 115. And the things that are interesting to me is on page 114, there's an action that was done at the FDA, which I thought would be appropriate maybe for us. And also on 114, there's an action that I feel they went into the pharmaceutical company that was interrupting their ability to get a drug, and they did a sit-in at the company, which is something we could do about Ampligen. And they also did something on page 115. They had an FDA action about getting a cure. Anyway, we have very few people who can show up, Alexis, and you know that, Terri. We have very few people who are healthy enough to show up. So I think we have to really be very thoughtful about how do we do that. Anyway, these are the actions so far in the book that I feel are useful.
May I respond to that?
Please.
Well, first of all, I took part in the FDA action. That was my first arrest with ACT UP, and I'm very proud of having done that. One of the ways that we try to design all of our actions is so that everyone, regardless of ability, can participate. And it's true that planning and doing a direct action can be very physically exhausting. But I wanted to let you know that when I was arrested at Trump Tower about 3 days ago, we had several people in their 70s, and we had one 84-year-old woman who has been doing direct action for many years in our group. And she did not want to have to sit down because she was really concerned about getting up again. And she also did not want to go limp because she didn't want to have the police, manhandling her, carrying her. And so she stood when everybody sat down, and she walked with the police under arrest when the time came. But I think that there are all different kinds of ways that you could think of that would make it a little bit easier. There is no getting around the fact that direct action takes a long time. It takes about, I would say, once we were arrested, it was another 6 or 7 hours before we were all processed in jail. But we were sitting in jail. Some of us were lying down in jail, and we were asking for the things that we needed. So while we didn't have access to food and drink until the police brought it to us, which is unusual and very lovely, they're actually on a cycle. And if you are arrested within that cycle, they feed you within the food cycle. But if you get arrested late at night, you may have missed the food cycle. So there are ways to plan your action so that it will be as conducive as possible for people with different kinds of bodies to take part. You might want to consider doing an action where everybody's sitting in a wheelchair.
I have a quick question.
Please.
In regards to arrest, many of us with this illness, that might be putting on a big post-exertional delay or crash. I wouldn't mind, but if you are arrested, do they accommodate for your medical needs? Because many of us can't go without food or water, or they need their medication, or they need to be in situations that are not around people, noise, etc. So is there something that could be planned for when we get arrested to take care of our medical needs?
Yes, and it really depends on how you are treated in your particular jurisdiction. For example, it used to be that we would tell people, especially in the early days of the AIDS crisis, that if you were on medication, you should bring the medication in a prescription bottle with you. Not all of your pills, but enough to get you through the next 48 or 72 hours. Then we would also have support, have your medication. And this is where the lawyers are really important, because the lawyers can advocate for you. The support people carry your medication for you, but it's the lawyers who can get back into a jail. What it seems that people are doing nowadays in New York City is if you go into jail with medication, even in a prescription bottle, they will take you out of jail and take you to the nearest hospital. And usually they will take you in handcuffs because you're still considered to be a perpetrator of a crime. They will take you from the jail to the hospital, and they will administer the hospital in a hospital setting. So people who were involved with our affinity group, many of whom take different kinds of medication, were concerned about that. And they either chose not to bring their medication for this particular arrest, or they chose to bring their medication knowing that they might be removed from the group and taken to a local hospital where the police could administer the medication. It's sort of like they have to do it under supervision. Talking about post-event crashes. I mean, I came down with a terrible head cold when I was in jail that I'm only just recovering from. So I commiserate. I've been flat on my back for the last 3 days, but it was certainly worth it for me to participate in this particular event with my comrades to get our point across. So even though I've had to take the last 3 days off and I'm blowing my nose and taking lots of ibuprofen, I consider it well worth, the exertion. What I often do when I go to jail is I take earplugs with me. Jails can be cold and they can be noisy. So we always tell people to dress in layers. Even if it's hot in jail, you can take off your layer and then make a pillow. But dressing in layers and bringing in earplugs can be very helpful.
Hi, this is Rivka. Oops.
Hi, Rivka.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. And Terri, as always, thank you. So this is our fundamental conundrum as a community. I'm going to turn my video on, but I'm worried that I'll disappear because my bandwidth is bad. Actually, I won't turn my video on. It'll put too much of a strain on my bandwidth. Our fundamental conundrum is, number one, that because we have been disbelieved for so many years, people didn't believe that we were actually sick and patients, that we have very few allies, healthy allies, and very few family members. I mean, I can count on almost one hand, maybe two, the healthy allies that I know of my sick friends with people who are sick with ME. So we don't have healthy people to get out there and fight with us. Jen's film hopefully will turn some of that around, and we have wonderful people like Carol Head and, my mom, Bobby, but very few healthy people to get out there and get on the streets with us. And then when it comes to us, people with ME, the ones who are moderate and would only be down for a couple of weeks after a protest, who would only have the post-exertional malaise or post-exertional crash for a couple of weeks after a protest, I would call them moderate patients. And they're busy working and trying to survive. And so there's absolutely no extra room for any protest because they're just trying to survive with working and still bring in an income. Those of us who are more severe, and a lot of us are severe, those of us who are drawn towards activism are severe because our lives have pretty much been taken away from us. And so we're bedridden. And I was one of the people that was helping to coordinate the citywide leaders for the Millions Missing protests. And all the Blue Jean video conference call meetings, everybody was conferencing in from their bed, literally, and like lying down, like unable to even sit up. So those of us who are more driven to try to, really change things are the sicker ones who can't do anything. So just to paint a bit of a picture, I was helping out with the Millions Missing protest in the fall, and then the repercussions were like so severe, and it wasn't just me. We all disappeared afterwards. We were so sick that we just fell off the face of the map. And I slid into the worst relapse I've ever had. And I actually didn't even know if I was going to survive it. And that's not unusual. A lot of the people that were part of that October Millions Missing, some of the organizers are still gone. They're still disappeared with this, unable, sitting in darkened rooms, unable to have any type of stimulation. So my thinking is that this is our fundamental conundrum. We have no allies who are healthy that can do this work with us, and we're not physically capable. So everything that you said about protests, I love, because in my heart, that's exactly where I am. But physically, I think we have to find something that doesn't require arrest, because I just don't see how we could do that.
Let me offer another way to think about this that would include arrest. It might not include your arrest, but civil disobedience works best as part of a much larger campaign where people are being educated, where you are getting the word out, where you are making allyships, where you are drawing people to your cause. So there are ways, which you're already doing, where you are building community, and where you can show up potentially for something like a legal picket or something which is less exerting, and then build towards a particular CD action, which may take place with people of different abilities, but where you have gotten to a point where it's not just people with ME who are participating in your civil disobedience. So, for example, we did the action at Trump Tower, and there were very few immigrants and refugees in our group, primarily because people who don't have permanent status will be, judged much more harshly by our police system. So we felt it was up to us to take this particular risk, to highlight this particular issue. But that's after, years of solidarity building from the undocumented community to the documented community. A lot of work has happened. Many people were deported under Obama, and we are starting to do this work now in solidarity because of the Trump policies that are so heinous. So what I would say is, remember that these campaigns need to be created slowly over time. You need to gather your people, and it doesn't take that many to do a protest. So I would say that CD is still a useful tool when and if you have you've done the other work to support it.
Alexis, I just wanted to bring something up that kind of piggyback on Rivka's kind of painting the picture of our community. I am a person with ME, but I am not someone who wouldn't be able to get arrested. Like today, if we had something, I could get arrested. Today is a good day. I feel good. Yesterday, I was in excruciating pain. I could not have gotten arrested. But I want to kind of go back to one of your slides where you talked about support. So many people with ME, about 25% of us, are homebound or bedbound. So we couldn't even physically get to the protest space to even consider being arrested. We just cannot get out of the bed to leave our homes. I just was wondering if you could talk about the importance of all the kinds of support that maybe a person who maybe is homebound or bedbound could support the group that maybe is going to protest and potentially get arrested, so that they feel like they are contributing to this particular issue.
Sure. So, when we've had really big actions within ACT UP, we often have media and support central, which is where people are answering the phones and providing information to the media, and also providing information, acting as a kind of network hub to provide information to the lawyers and to people's, significant others to understand where people are in the system. So even for people who can't risk arrest, and there are many different reasons, besides being physically incapacitated, there are many reasons why people choose not to be arrested. There is a definite need for people to do support, to make sure that people are accounted for and tracked, and that media attention is getting out to specific news. We don't call them newspapers anymore, but you know what I mean. News organizations, so that information about what happened and why the arrest went down is being promulgated. So that's another role. And again, not everybody, that's a fairly active role. It can be an active role that you can do, lying on a couch, answering a phone, if you're not being, discombobulated by noise, if you don't have a migraine. We also need people on site who are not risking arrest, but who are following the people who have gotten arrested and figuring out which particular jails they're being taken to, which precincts, and then are there for those people, perhaps in waves, perhaps in staggered shifts, to be there when people get released from jail. So again, that particular kind of support can be a little taxing, because it can be a long time from people getting arrested to being released. But if people did that kind of work in shifts, it could be made a slightly easier burden. So there are a number of different things that people can do that are not risking arrest, that help make an action go more smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, I was even thinking like helping to put together the press release, maybe even tweeting or posting things on Facebook, that kind of thing. I know,
Sure.
Celine, I think you had a question. Celine? That's her name. Celine, did you raise your hand at one point?
Hang on. Yes, hello. I'm from the Netherlands. By the way, we do not have a protesting tradition. That ended at the 60s, so we're having a hard time with our protesters image, and we've only been very polite, non-violent, and non-aggressive. It was only a media offense, so that's already threatening for some people, obviously. So, but I have a question on solidarity, because we feel we have to toughen up actions, maybe not by protesting in the street, but you could occupy buildings, or by doing phone calls, like a day of calling to one city council.
Yes.
But we lack, what I notice is we have a small group of 4 people who do basically all the work, also show their face in media, and it's really hard when we get serious to find people who want to take any kind of risk. So, I mean, I'm speaking of a small local radio station interview. I mean, you don't even have to use your own name. And people already withdrawing, like, oh my God, no, this is going too far now, you're getting too big. So how can you keep the solidarity and people active? Because first there was the surprise, and the success, and everybody wants to belong there. But now that we're asking people to actually do something, to step up, to go to their mayor, for example. So, for example, we now have a trick with lighting up buildings in small cities, doesn't matter where you are, as small as can be. The idea is that people find each other, show some solidarity, and go together in their local communities to see a mayor. They just won't. I mean, they just let each other down really badly, and we're like puzzled. Like, how can this be changed? I mean, obviously there is a lack of solidarity. People may not be used to it, or they're afraid of what? So we sort of need to create a better support network for that. We don't know how.
Well, I would offer that one of the ways to do it, it is very hard to do this work when you're only 2 or 3. And I really appreciate the effort. And I think that it's important to understand that we are all in this for the long haul. When I joined ACT UP after my father had died, I came into a movement that was already a year into doing direct action. And I felt very, very lucky and very privileged because I walked into a room where 200 people were meeting every night. But that was 8 years into the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
That's not, the very first thing that happened. The very first thing that happened in the AIDS activist movement was that people created direct services for people who were living with HIV and AIDS that hadn't existed before. This is a part of direct action, but it absolutely takes time to build a movement. And I will say that one of the best things I believe that happened to the AIDS activist movement was one of the first arrests happened before my dear friend Jamie Bauer joined ACT UP. And it was an arrest that was very disempowering for the people who took part in it, because it was completely negotiated with the police. They stepped over a line, they got arrested. And the people who participated in that arrest said, "This sucks. This feels terrible. We want to really know how to do civil disobedience." Now, this is after many, many years of creating awareness, creating direct services for people living with HIV and AIDS. So there was a certain kind of momentum. They reached out to an organization called the War Resisters League. And that's an organization that's been in existence since the Second World War in the United States. War Resisters League comes out of a conscientious objection to the war. It also comes out of the Quaker movement. And these are the people who have been keeping direct action and civil disobedience alive between crises. These are the people who are dedicating their lives to preserving information. So Jamie, who's queer, was sent over to ACT UP to train people in how to do civil disobedience that would be empowering. And when I went to ACT UP and was trained by Jamie, I thought, this is what I want to do. Because what we're doing when we train people is we're not just offering tools for how to do a variety of different direct action and in specific civil disobedience. What we're also doing is we're building community. We're building disciplined community who are ready and able to act in solidarity with each other. So I would recommend that I have to get on a plane and come to Amsterdam. And do
Welcome. Yeah.
It wouldn't be my first.
Bring the whole crew.
That would be wonderful. But in fact, we do travel. There are a number of us who are from ACT UP, whose political activism started before ACT UP, and now we are ACT UP veterans, but we are organizing with other direct action organizations, and we are providing trainings. And sometimes the training is just like today. It's to get people aware of what the possibilities are and what the repercussions are. And sometimes it's because people are, in fact, planning an action. I don't mind if people are thinking about the information or going to be doing an action tomorrow. My interest is giving people the information so that together in a community, you can make that decision. And what's very interesting to me about Erica Chenoweth's TED Talk is that what she shows is that even in countries where there's no history, where there's no tradition of direct action or civil disobedience, like the Netherlands, perhaps in the last few years, that these traditions can be restarted. That you may not want to start with civil disobedience, you may want to start with another kind of mass action or small group action, but there are many different kinds of direct action that you can take. And I would love to continue the conversation. I love Amsterdam.
Good. Me too. Except for the ME policy.
I didn't know if you were in Amsterdam. Not everyone in the Netherlands is in Amsterdam.
I am in Amsterdam, yeah. Yeah.
Please be in touch and let's continue talking.
Alexis, can you talk a little bit more about affinity group? Because I think that sometimes people think that in order to plan a direct action, that it has to be huge, and huge for our community, maybe 50 people, it may be 100. But could you talk about the role of affinity group, and that even 4 to 5 people could, do something that gets attention and increases change, and could even be an affinity group that decides that they do want to risk arrest?
Sure. So an affinity group with over 15 people is really too large. You can have a big action that's made up of many, many affinity groups, but a good size is about 15 people. It's very difficult for people to make consensus-based decisions in the field, when you've got a policeman, breathing down your neck, or when you have to make a quick decision, are we going to do this now or are we going to wait? It's very difficult to make a consensus-based decision with any more than 15 people. It just becomes unwieldy. You can do it. I've seen it done, but it's not really a consensus-based decision at that point. So there are a lot of affinity groups that are either what we call pickup affinity groups. These are affinity groups that get together for a particular action, for a particular cause. Or there are affinity groups that work together over the course of many, many years, and they get arrested together, and sometimes they don't get arrested together. Sometimes they'll go to an anti-war demonstration together, or today, a couple of my affinity group members called me on the phone and they asked me if I was going to the tax march. And I couldn't because I'm still sick and I'm blowing my nose and I feel miserable. But it would have been great. That's exactly what affinity group members do, is you use the structure of an affinity group to do other things. You're actually people who like each other. You actually hang out with each other, whether or not you're participating in doing direct action. So an affinity group can be as small as 4 or 5 people. With a small affinity group, you may have a very symbolic blockade. With a larger affinity group or with 2 affinity groups together, you might have something more than a symbolic blockade, sitting in front of a government building to make a protest. But either way, you are still doing direct action. And either way, you can still consider doing civil disobedience. But an affinity group means that you're a decision-making group, you work together, you have each other's backs, you plan things together, you talk about the pros and cons of different kinds of actions, and then you also work with either other affinity groups or you work with other support people to make sure that you are educating people, that you have the right leaflets, that you're getting word out to the media, that people are taking notice of what you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. We actually have a question somebody typed in.
Cool.
And they wanted, we they wanted me to ask you about, you had talked about public disruption, I think when you were one of the first couple of slides, which is something I think our community can do with, like, you know, a couple of people, at least more so than, you know, a type of a larger CD event. And I'm wondering if you can give an example of public disruption. I mean, the one that comes to mind in my head is Bob Rasky and what he did with Bill Clinton, but I'm wondering if you may have another one that you think is a
Sure.
better story to share.
No, there are all different kinds of public disruptions. I mean, we had a lot of different people working in ACT UP to do a lot of different things. So we would have people who worked in publicity who were able to get the schedules of different public officials. We would have people who were alumni of different Ivy League schools who would see when there'd be, you know, different people coming to speak in semi-public, semi-private settings. We would have people who were working in development and who knew when different kinds of fundraisers were happening. So we would have people who would, you know, this is back when I was in my mid-20s and I was working sporadically as a house painter and a carpenter because I wanted to be able to do this kind of direct action work. But occasionally, you know, we'd go to the Salvation Army, we'd go to a thrift shop and we'd buy special clothes to make us look like we were fancy people. And then using, you know, pretend invitations, or maybe somebody else would buy the invitation for us. So we would actually be legitimately let into a particular event. You know, we would go in and at a particular moment, we would start chanting or holding up signs, which we had hidden, you know, in our bags or on our person, and we would make a disruption. We would always have a demand. We might have leaflets to hand out, which might have information written down and a way to contact us. You know, this was not the only point of contact that we might want to have, but it was very important to call people out for whatever their role was in making our lives harder. And what this would do, typically, what would happen is we'd make a disruption, which for some people is very difficult. But when our lives were at stake during the AIDS crisis, we felt that shutting down business as usual we had a perfectly moral reason for interrupting somebody's fundraising party or somebody's speech. And typically what would happen would be we would be ushered out. We would not be arrested. Now, the action a couple of days ago started with disruption. This is the action that we did at Trump Tower. We gave out leaflets. We also threw leaflets off a couple of balconies. We let out enormous banners that said no wall, no raid, no ban. And then we also blocked the elevators. All of those are disruptive actions. The banners were very light. The leaflets were very light. We were doing this in a privately operated public space. So we could have done this action. And in fact, the police wanted us to do this action and not get arrested. They implored us to leave, and we refused. And we refused for a couple of reasons. We could have just done the action, done it as a disruption, and left. And that would have been a successful action. But we also recognized that because many of us were committed to risking arrest, if we got arrested, we would have more publicity. So it was done to show our commitment to the cause, and because we had the number of people. But there were a number of people who carried on with us, who gave out leaflets, who threw down banners, dropped banners, who shouted and chanted. And those people, when we all sat down and showed that we were willing to risk arrest, those people left. They were part of our affinity group action, but they did not stay to risk arrest. So there can be different levels of participation.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. I wanted to just let folks know about the one public disruption that really sticks in my head from activism.
Please.
This is a conversation that comes up a lot because, we're so frustrated. We have no FDA approved drugs. We have, very few in the United States medical providers who can spell our illness, much less provide any supportive care for us. And we get very frustrated with our government and our elected officials. So it comes up a lot, to get their attention kind of through a shame tactic to do public disruption. So when I think about, my work in HIV, I remember very, very clearly in the 1992 campaign for president when Bill Clinton was running that Bob Rafsky had an exchange with then Governor Bill Clinton at a nightclub in Midtown Manhattan and basically called him out publicly, saying this is the center of the AIDS epidemic. What are you going to do? Are you going to start a war on AIDS? Are you going to just go on and ignore it? And, Clinton said, can we talk now? And he said, go ahead and talk. And whatever he said wasn't satisfying to Bob Rafsky. Bill, we're not dying of AIDS as much as we're dying from 11 years of government. And, he kept kind of interrupting. Would you just calm down? And, this is, went all over the news that this happened. And then, unfortunately, Bob Rafsky died. But it was brought up again even when people wrote about his death. This was the, quote, public heckler of Clinton, but it made a difference because it raised awareness about HIV and what was happening. So I think there is some power in, kind of public disruption and certainly calling out elected officials.
Yes. And, we can divide up the roles. When I talked earlier about the inside-outside strategy of ACT UP, there are people who can be fierce and strong and stand up to elected officials. And there are other people who, want to make T-shirts for us and want to write pamphlets. I think that it's not necessary for everyone to do all of this different kinds of work, but it is necessary to bring everyone together who's interested in making change. And then you can figure out, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I'm good at doing? What is it that I want to get better at doing? When I joined ACT UP and I went to my first CD training, I said, this is the work that I want to do. I want to share this information with other people and help empower them. It wasn't that I stopped confronting public officials, but that was the work that I really felt more empowered to do, because it's really about building community and sharing skills and sort of being the pipeline, creating the pipeline to bring people into working in whatever way they need to work to make social change or for justice. That's my
This
take.
is Rivka. Could I ask another question? Or if someone else has a question, I will defer to them, of course, since I've already asked one.
It looks like, I don't want to brutalize your name. Is it Sarika?
I can't hear Sarika.
You're unmuted. Can you unmute yourself? And then Rivka will take you next. Yeah, we still can't hear you. Do you want to write your question in the chat box and then I can read it? Okay. So while you're typing, is it okay if I do Rivka? Okay. So Rivka, you go ahead and ask your question while she's typing in the chat box.
Okay, thanks. I just keep circling back to this fundamental conundrum that we have, which is that, we've been doing this now for 30 years, so this is not new. This is a 30-year battle that a lot of us have been doing already. And in 30 years, we still keep getting, an occasional headline that says, chronic fatigue syndrome is found to be real. Every couple of years we get that kind of thing. But by and large, nobody believes that. By and large, the world thinks, we're a pariah, basically a pariah disease. People don't even think we have a disease. They think that we're making something up or something. So we're fighting against these incredible, huge boulder-sized stigmas. And we're fighting against the fact that we don't have allies, and we're fighting against the fact that we're too weak, literally, to leave our homes. So I think that what we need to do is come up with something really unique and original that is not about large civil disobedience campaigns and not about getting arrested, because our community just can't handle it. We don't have that kind of capacity. So that's why the public disruption campaigns seem much more doable to me. If Collins is speaking at Harvard University, maybe 2 people could show up and unfurl a banner or start singing or something like that. Maybe they could do it, maybe not. But I think that this is where our next step is, Terri. I think that we really have to start thinking creatively about minimal effort, big media response. And when I did talk to the Code Pink women, the women that go do a lot of public disruption, they go to somebody's speech and they interrupt. They're never, like you said, Alexis, they're never arrested, because being arrested is bad publicity for, Harvard University that's hosting Francis Collins' speech. So, because us getting arrested, I think that we can't do that. We're just not physically capable. So again, I just would like to have a second one of these talks where we brainstorm, and I know Terri and I have mentioned this to each other, that, we brainstorm about the most minimal type of exertion that will get us, the media attention that we need.
The other thing to do is I would recommend that you bring in allies. In the beginning days of the AIDS crisis, the allies were our doctors, and the allies were also caregivers. And I understand that you have a lot of, there's a lot of distrust about the nature of the illness to fight against. But I can't believe that there isn't a single practitioner out there who isn't furious about, the lack of, headway on medication and the way in which their patients have been ignored. And I would try to see if there was a way to leverage, practitioners want to be helping people. Sometimes you have to get involved in the political process too.
Yeah. I think that those are all great points. I will be getting arrested at some point for ME, so that's a goal of mine, to plan that appropriately. And I do know that there are people that are our allies that are willing to do that with me. So I do know that that is something that's a possibility. I do think that we can take more advantage of different people of power who are speaking at different events to do public disruption and engage in some kind of shame-based tactics. I'm aware that we have 3 more minutes before we close, and I just wanted to find out if anybody else has a question that maybe hasn't gotten to speak thus far.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can?
Yes. Who is this?
Oh, hi. This is Sarika. I am having
a
problem with my phone, and I'm at my sister's house for Easter. So in response to what Rivka said before about those 25% of the people who really want to do help and can't, and I am one of those 25%. And then in response to, you were talking about skill sets and how we can use skill sets. What do you think about coming up with a list of Alexis, like you said, you're so scared. This is what you want to do. Coming up with a list of people divided by areas where their skill sets. For example, I was in sales. I'm very good at cold calling people and being influential even on the phone, even if I can't do it face to face. Or if someone was to get arrested, maybe be a buddy to that person and call and make the phone calls or whatever is necessary. So maybe
Absolutely.
as a solution, if we could have a list of those 25% of people who are very involved in their hearts but can't physically be there and are able to do things.
I would go one step further. I would go one step further and have everyone put together a list of what their what their possible involvement might be able to be, and that way, really have a network where you have skills to build towards an education campaign, to build towards publicity, et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's a marvelous way to think about
like
networking.
for example, I am right now working with my son is in high school, and I'm working with a small charity event, my very first one, where I'm involving his friends. These are seniors, and to like get the word out. They didn't even know what myalgic encephalitis meant. I went on their website and stuff like that, where just to like you were saying, build your people first.
Absolutely.
Build your people, and then you can take an action. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it for the people who are 25%. And to Rivka's point, I can also only count on 2 fingers. So right now, I'm in the process of building my people in the local area. And I think if we have some kind of a list, for example, for the people who are out there and getting arrested, whatever help they might need, for example, if there's something in my area and I'm able to host them at home and say, hey, come stay with me if you're out of jail, and I am happy to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it is overwhelming to think about this when you look at the pressures that are arrayed against you. And you just say,
Right.
if I'm sitting here in New York and I think to myself, Trump, then the next word out of my mouth is fuck.
Exactly.
What am I going to do? But if I break this down into a number of pieces, into a number of different ways that we have to approach this, here's a day, here's a time, here's an action, here's a group, here's what we need to organize, all of a sudden it becomes very task-based. And if you're hooked into the kind of planning, which is an overall campaign, which you're building up to, okay, we get, X number of interviews on the radio by this date. We have this many teach-ins at local colleges by this date. Then you are making whatever you are doing part, your civil disobedience is part of an overall campaign for direct action to raise awareness and to make change. Then it becomes a series of tasks. What do you need to do to make each one of those events successful? And it's a lot, but it's not quite as overwhelming as Trump.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm aware that we're ending our time. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Alexis for being part of our day. I really appreciate your knowledge and your experience and passion.
Thanks for having me.
You're just a gift to our community. And I want to thank the people who participated, and I want to acknowledge I see you. I see you in the bed. I see you struggling to be on this discussion, and I really want to applaud you for being here. I just am very grateful for all the heart and soul that people put into trying to make our lives better. I just want to close by saying, please email me at tlwilder@mindspring.com. If you have suggestions for future activist discussions, I want this to be ongoing. I want us to keep upping the ante on what we demand and how we demand it. So I'll just close by saying that. And thanks, everybody, again. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Alexis.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
I'm off.